Before we get started, make sure you subscribe to this channel. That way, when I release more videos like this, you'll get notified. Welcome to the show, Sarah. I am so excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Okay, so I had to have you on as part of my favorite executive series because you are one of my favorite executives. We worked together, I think it was like 10 years ago at Wyndham. So tell me, just introduce yourself real quick to the audience. Tell them about who you are, what you do.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. My name's Sarah King. I'm currently the Chief People and Diversity Officer at Darden Restaurants, based here in Orlando, Florida. I spent 20 years with a global hotel company, which is how I met Betsy. And when I'm not working, I am, trying to keep my two kids out of trouble and spend time with my friends. But, that's pretty fun and not that difficult. So I spend a lot of time working.
So one of the funnest things about, well, first off, you are an amazingly fun person, great heart, just a great person all the way around. But as a leader, one of the things I appreciated as your consultant was just how much vision you had, how much passion you had, always seeing around the other side. But I assume that were you always like that? Like, kind of take me back through your journey in leadership. Like, what was like your early career? When did you get into management, and when did you make the leap into executive leadership?
Okay, well, that's quite a story, as you know. So a bit of an unconventional story, I would say. So I'm originally from New Zealand, and we don't have the same culture there about, you've got to go to college to be successful. It's probably more of an entrepreneurial culture, and there's many paths to, building a successful career. And in fact, what a successful career looks like. So I was not always like this. I was very much a bit of a lost soul when I was in my early 20s and couldn't really figure out what I wanted to do. I worked in hospitality because I was always good at dealing with people. And then I fell into the HR world when I was in my late 20s, and I was very transactional because, quite frankly, I don't think I really knew what I was doing. I didn't have any experience and I didn't have any qualifications, but I learned really quickly, and I started to realize that I have a natural head for business, and the functional stuff, the HR discipline I can learn. I had a couple of really good mentors along the way, which certainly helps, but also you've got to be willing to take their counsel and take their advice. So I was really just such a sponge. I think I started, but a very transactional sponge. And I remember people using the word strategic, and I used to think, I don't really know what that means. And we didn't have Google in those days, so I couldn't Google it. And so I just kept paying attention and trying to figure out what exactly that meant. And then probably, in the middle of my career, I started moving into more senior roles, but still only at that director VP level. So started to get a little bit of a feel for having to connect the dots and not just do the work. And then probably, maybe about 15 years ago, which I don't feel like I'm that old, but clearly I am. My company moved me to a role that was supporting a lot of business units across a lot of different countries in Europe, Middle East, Africa, and India. And I think that was probably when I had to make the transition from being the doer of all things to, as I often tell people, conducting the band instead of playing the instrument, because I had so much geographical disbursement and so many different countries to deal with, and different cultures and different languages. And it was just completely and utterly impossible to do everything just through muscling through and doing the heavy lifting. So I think that was really the first job where I started to appreciate the importance of influence over authority. Because frankly, I didn't actually have any authority. I had all these people with these dotted lines into me, right? And so at the end of the day, I was a corporate matrix leader, but they were in country listening to their leadership teams in country. So that was a very big milestone for me in terms of learning how to get out of the transactional stuff and move into the transformational stuff. And so then I moved over here to the US and took on a much bigger role, which was about 12 years ago. And that was really, I didn't know it at the time, but looking back, hindsight's 2020, that was when I was able to understand that I'd had this great experience working in EMEA that had taught me how to influence without authority. And I was able to sort of apply it into this organization, which frankly was not used to that kind of HR. They had very transactional HR leaders that were, not thinking about how to connect the dots with business strategy and people strategy. So in a nutshell, I think that's how I got there. And then obviously I had the opportunity to, as I built my brand, I had the opportunity to, dip into things that weren't within the true HR world, which is how you and I met, because I could see business problems that weren't being solved. And the great thing about leading HR is that you get to see across the whole organization. So you see all the pain points. You see how the left hand sometimes is not talking to the right hand. You see some of the, the working in silos and working as an island. And so I think when you and I worked together, that was the first opportunity that I had to sort of say, hey, I can see all this from 50,000 feet, and I think I know how we can address this. And it really just took off from there. And then in my current role, it's just, it's almost become second nature to me, because like any habit, when you practice it more and more, it becomes a very natural way of being. And it's very much the expectation of my CEO and my leadership team that I'm thinking about the business. Even though I'm running the HR function, I actually run other things that are not true HR too, so that helps. But I'm there as a senior leader of our business, not the leader of the HR function and everything else that doesn't really have a home. So I think that's.
Are you saying that you only had the chief HR role at Wyndham for 2 years when I met you? You were like,
Yep.
You were initiating that big of a change project with only 2 years. That I did
Yes.
not realize that was that new. So how did you get into such a senior role so fast? Like, what do you think is the secret to that? Is it that you had that entrepreneurial point of view where you were not constrained by the boxes within HR? Was it honing your influence, leading without influence skills, or is there anything else that allowed you to get that credibility and land that senior kind of role where other HR people had probably had a lot more years of experience than you had at the time?
So I think there's a couple of things. Number one, you have to be able to naturally connect with people. I think, the nature of the HR role is dealing with people, right? And so you have to be able to naturally connect. I call it the likability factor. It certainly helps. It's not necessary, but it certainly helps. But I do believe that the fact that I never studied HR helped me, because I didn't come at leading the function with the approach of like, well, here's what the HR book says. And I think I'm just fortunate that, it worked out well for me, because I do have a natural interest in, and I guess capability for business and how things work and how things connect, and being able to say, well, this is broken over here, but here's some root causes over here, and just being able to see all that. And I don't know what that's called. I think it's just something that fortunately
systems thinking.
Yeah. And having the ability to do that. But I also have over the years just, gotten results. I mean, you obviously have to get results to be considered for promotion, but I feel like I've done it in a way that is helpful for people. And I've always tried to understand the pain points for, all areas of the organization, and not just think about it from the perspective of, well, this is what I think HR should do because we're HR, right? So yeah, it's a great question. And I guess it's just a combination of, having some courage, having an inquisitive mind, being a naturally born driver, but also understanding that you can't just drive without thinking about the impact that you have on people.
So it seems like you really set up yourself and your organization to be not an HR or traditional HR function, but more internal consultants to the organization, influencing change influencing what needs to be done, solving problems, and where appropriate, the traditional HR tools, but do what it takes to solve the problems and be that partner to the business. Is that accurate or?
That is accurate. And, you know, I remember years and years and years ago, somebody gave me this great sort of, you know, best practice model of an effective transformational HR leader. And I'll try and remember there was 4 key components of it. You know, the obvious ones are employee advocate, change agent, business partner. And then the 4th one was administrative expert. Now, I make this point because you don't get to be a business partner and a change agent and an employee advocate if you can't get the fundamentals right. So there is a component of HR where we have to make sure that we get the basic fundamentals right so that our people have a good experience as employees. So, you know, that's not my happy place, but I've always known how to hire people that are really, really good at that. But because if you can't, I don't know, pay people properly or get them hired on time or do all the fundamental basic things, then you have a credibility issue. So you don't even get to play in those other 3 quadrants. And so I was always very aware that I needed to make sure that we were, you know, excellent at that, as well as having, you know, strong financial acumen so that we earned the right to be thought partners, business partners, you know, advocates, all those other great things that is where I prefer to spend my time.
Yeah, so it's like your team like kind of paid the tolls, you know, you paid the foundational elements. By the way, that's the Dave Ulrich model, I believe. Dave Ulrich and Jill Connors, I think, are the one who wrote that. I think the assessment is somewhere. I'll find it for other people to look at, because that was really transformational for me when I was getting my master's in HR. And I think that there's some things that you and I might have had as a philosophical alignment that we were not aware. But
Right.
that is that part. Like, I like the strategic and change agent, didn't like the other part, but you have to get that stuff done. You got to do the bread and butter of that part. So it seems like being really clear on what your happy place is and hiring people for the parts that's not your happy place. And then for the parts of the business that do need to influence the rest of the organization, because you got all of those things situated, now you have this part. But you mentioned something else about the business acumen and the financial acumen. I find a lot of consultants, coaches, and HR people, this is not also one of the things that is not their happy place. How do you develop yourself and your team around the financial acumen? And how did you learn to speak the language of business?
So first of all, I don't ever let anybody on my team say, oh, I'm not very good with numbers. That is not allowed, because you don't get to have that option when you work in business. You've got to figure out how to get good with numbers. And I knew that very early on. I knew that, you know, if I wanted to have a voice, that I needed to be able to speak to the CEO and the CFO in a way that showed them that I wasn't just coming at something with, you know, a warm, fuzzy HR perspective, that I had thought about the return on investment. In my early days, I read a lot of books, and I had a lot of great mentors. One of my very earliest mentor was somebody that at the time was my managing director, but he had come up through the finance world, and he was really, really helpful in impressing upon me the need to be able to speak business language if you want to get a seat at the table. You don't just get it because you're in a job, you earn it because, you know, you can speak business language. So I'm forever grateful that, you know, he gave me that lesson. And again, fortunately, I think I, you know, have enough intellect to be able to grasp, you know, the importance around, you know, the business case and all those things, whilst still being that employee champion. But I just sought people that I admired, that were like really good at the things that I wasn't super strong at. And just learned, right? I was just such a sponge. I'm like, I want to learn. I want to be able to sit in a room and have this conversation the way she can or the way he can. I want people to, you know, see me as a credible leader that's thinking about the business and not just the employees, because it's a balance in this role, right? I have to support the needs of the business and the management teams, as well as supporting the needs of the employees. So again, I go back to saying that I'm a naturally born driver. I think I just am so competitive with myself, and I hate not knowing anything. And I think because I never went to college, I always had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about wanting to make sure that nobody could ever hold that against me. So I over-indexed and overcompensated to make sure that nobody could ever accuse me of not deserving to be in the room.
So it's almost like you took what could have been a weakness and you made it into a superpower, is you keep this learning mindset. And do you feel like that learning mindset has like allowed you to move into different roles, different opportunities, and probably move from different countries too?
Yeah, no, most definitely, because I am a naturally curious person. I get very easily bored. And so that's probably what fuels my, if I'm starting to get bored, I'm like, well, let me go over here and see, like maybe I can dive in here and see if I can make an impact here. I've always wanted to make sure that I show up every day and add value. And so, that combined with being a natural driver, combined with being very inquisitive, some might say nosy, I think is just what drives me to always be looking at other ways to add value. And similarly, one of the other things I've learned is just because something is always set in your area doesn't mean it's the right place for it. So I think I've always been able to go into new roles and go, why do we have compliance here? It should be in law. Or why do we have safety and security here? It should be in our risk management team. And so being non-territorial has also helped me, because I always think about what's the best place for this work to get done in the organization. Not like, oh, let me see how much of an empire I could build, which is something I see people do at their own peril.
Yeah, there's so many ways to go down with this conversation. I want to go back to what you said about the learning thing, and I want to go back to the empire and then how you naturally sort things. One of the things, as you were saying, is a transformational leader. And you and I encountered this in the change project we were working on together. And I see this all the time. The number one barrier to change is that this is the way we've always done it. Like you might put a solution in there, but then, it just reverts back to this is the way we've always done it in just a new format. So, and when you're dealing with these large companies, so you're working right now in a very established company, you worked with a very established company before. How do you break a team? How do you break a team out of that, this is the way we've always done it mindset, to get back into that learner point of view? Because that's the whole thing. One of the things that frustrated you and I is like, we do a lot of research. We find out from the customers what they want. We find out with employees what they want. And then we present the data and they're like, we don't care. We're just going to keep doing it the way that we always want to do it. How do you manage that? And how do you create that kind of learning culture?
Well, I think there's a few points to touch on there. Number one, I have learned very well over the years about understanding organizational readiness. I am a naturally impatient person. And so I've had to temper my impatience and understand more around organizational readiness, because sometimes it's about timing, right? Sometimes it's about timing. So, I'm not sure I did that then, but knowing then maybe that's what taught me that lesson, is that sometimes it's about timing. Because ironically, some of the stuff that you and I worked on has now been implemented, and you and I don't need the credit for it. It's not about the credit, right?
Right.
And so it's just about patience and timing. Secondly, I also think I've learned that you have to help people understand that going through change, which people are typically not super comfortable with change, and I love it. And again, a strength over maximized can become a weakness. So you've got to figure out how to bring people along and help them understand how changing is going to be better for them than staying the same. And so for me, in both these last two jobs, I've worked with very established leadership teams that have worked together as a team, and I've come in and been the new girl, and that's been challenging, because I can see pretty quickly that there's opportunities for change, but you don't want to go in guns blazing and say, I know better than you. And then people put their defensive walls up, quite rightly. So I think I've learned patience, and I've learned timing, and I've learned how to bring people along so that they get there on their own and say, oh, wait a minute, this is better for me or my team or my department or this company, without me, jamming it down their throats, which frankly, in the earlier days of my career, I would just be like, well, you're all idiots if you can't see that this is a better way of doing things. And, that's super engaging to get buy-in. So I don't know if it's age or wisdom or experience or a combination of all three, but I've learned patience, timing, and how to articulate the what's in it for me, for them.
So what about this idea around the non-territorial? I think that's really interesting because you're in the C-suite, and the C-suite, if anything, is very territorial. So you're being countercultural by being in the C-suite, not being territorial in the C-suite.
Well, I mean, I think that depends on your C-suite. Our
That's true.
C-suite is not territorial at all. Not to say I haven't worked for some that are, but certainly the more I come along in my career, the more I don't want to have to deal with that. Where I have issues more is with my direct reports. And if I can see that something is not sitting where it should from an org structure perspective, and I talk to them about making the change, they take it personally and they feel like they're, something's been taken away from them, which is where I think, when I mentioned earlier, you've got to bring them along and explain the why. But, I've started saying to people, so help me understand, because when I joined my current role, there were some things in my, group that just flat out didn't belong there. And I knew that. And so I'm like, I think we need to put this there and that there. And people were horrified. I'm like, okay, so help me understand why you would be concerned about giving up responsibility for something because it's got a better home, which means less work for you, and I'm not touching your pay. I mean, right. It's just, to me, it's an intelligence test, because now I can focus on things that I can actually impact that are of greater value. And often what I find is the stuff that people want to hold on to is highly administrative, busy work, and it's not value add. So, I've really had to help people shift their thinking. And I think I've definitely gotten my team, I've been where I am now for 5 years, and I've gotten my team into that place, but it was some tough going, because people do take it personally. And look, it's easy for me to sit here at the top of the org chart and say, oh, don't worry about me taking stuff off you. I think as people are trying to build their careers, they're wanting to prove that, they're great. But being great and adding value is not a reflection of how much stuff that you own.
I think it's interesting is like one of the things I deal with when I mentor people in their consulting and coaching businesses is they leave corporate and they have a direct line, authority, responsibility, budget, or have you. And then they move over here and everything's influence. And like, you don't understand, all the power is in the white space of the organization. If you can go in and you influence and you can create this change, you don't want to have anything on the org chart. You want to reduce everything. If anything's closer to the day-to-day, that's more the transactional stuff. If it's not on the org chart, that's the stuff you want to go after. You want to shape thinking around those. And it's a very hard message to get across, but it seems like that's where your philosophy around influence, the leading via influence and the power of leading by influence and being a value add, is this just something that is a mindset that you and I happen to share, or are these transferable skills that somebody, like if you were going to transfer the skill of saying, let go of the black space in the organization, go after the white space, the value add, the things that are not there that you can see, how would you develop somebody, or what could you suggest that helps somebody develop in that area?
Well, I think you've got to step back and explore why you're gravitating towards what is probably easier, right? At the end of the day, human beings are creatures of habit. And so often it's easier to go into something that's tangible because it feels like you can, make an impact or prove your worth or show what you can do. So, I would be asking myself, how do I used the word courageous before, how much courage do I have to want to, step over into this space that's maybe a little bit more murky, but risk versus reward, right? Because I can tell you right now, if I was working with a consultant that came in and sort of told me something I already know, I'd be like, well, that's nice, I got it validated. If I was working with a consultant that came in and held the mirror up in a way that I hadn't seen before and said, look at this opportunity, that is a hook that is much more powerful than telling me what I already know.
Right.
So you got to ask yourself questions about, are you gravitating towards your comfort zone versus wanting to have some courage and looking outside the box a little bit and thinking about how you can connect different dots that people maybe didn't even know were there.
I look at it as somewhat as a vision. Like sometimes it's like the stuff that you see, like you go into the room and it's like you just happen to see it. Like it's like it's just the invisible stuff just becomes like, well, can't you see it? It's right here. And it's like, well, it's an idea. I'm like, but look, it's right here. Don't you want to go after it?
I literally had this conversation with somebody yesterday, and it's funny, I've realized that I do this thing. So in my office at work, whenever I'm trying to help people like think more broadly, I point up to the corner of my office and I'm like, I can see the vision for this. I can see how it's going to happen. Now, I've learned that not everybody's brains work like that. And, I've been assessed to death, and I'm a highly conceptual person that likes to ideate. Not everybody's like that. And that's why I need to put people around me that can, land the plane. And I don't know why I'm like that. I think to some extent, I think we're born like that. But I can get frustrated when people don't see, and I still don't know why I look up into the corner.
I do that too, because that's where like there's something in our brains that's like, I see it, it's right here. Right. And so it's like when I'm thinking, it's like it's up here.
And it's just, to me, it's just so incredibly clear. But some of my leadership opportunities over the years have been, well, not everybody thinks like you, and then they're looking at you like you've got three heads, because they just cannot understand what on earth has possessed you to think that that's a good idea.
Right.
So much of this is about understanding your audience and understanding the people that you're working with, whether it's, as an employer, as a consultant, like what makes them tick? How do they make decisions? And some of the best lessons I ever learned was working with my former CFO, who because he was such an opposite to me in terms of how he thinks about things and how he makes decisions. And I would get frustrated because I didn't think he trusted me. And he would get frustrated because he thought I was being, cavalier. And when I started to understand how to talk about my vision, but give him the plan of how we're going to get there and what the end's going to look like and how it's going to be better for the organization, it completely changed our relationship. And again, built more credibility and built more trust. And so I didn't have to jump through as many hoops because he always trusted how I got there. But it's definitely been a challenge, right? And I think that is one of the challenges dealing with people in general, is you've got to understand who you're dealing with and not try and come at it the way you think, because it's not about you.
Yeah. So it's like, it's adapting your language to who you're talking about. So if you're not naturally an idea person, so some consultants aren't naturally idea people, they're process people. So they may or may not be the right fit for you.
Right.
Or maybe they are for certain circumstances.
Right.
That is one of the things I'm curious about is, so there's a lot of things that you seem to naturally be able to do on your own, is you know how to do org design on your own. You know how to ideate on your own. You know how to influence on your own. What motivated you to look for a consultant when you and I were working together? Like why, when you could do it on your own?
Well, partially because, as you mentioned earlier, I had only been there 2 years. So even though I could see the opportunity, I didn't have the street cred. And I do think that in certain situations, executives like to hear an external perspective to validate the thinking. And you and I joked a lot about this good cop, bad cop role that we each played through this whole process. I think if I'd have spent another 5 years in that organization and then gone and done that work by myself, it might have been a different outcome. But at the time, I recognized that I needed additional horsepower with somebody who was perceived as, and is, an expert in that space.
I think that you're bringing up an important part about the good cop, bad cop kind of thing in terms of our partnership. There's some of it is maybe the expert perspective. Maybe it's the outside perspective, that I could bring the outside perspective to validate your perspective. There is something really powerful about the good cop, bad cop when you do have a consultant who partners with the internal consulting or the internal organization. One of
Mhm.
the things that I'm very clear on is like a lot of consultants look at HR as like, oh, you're the impediment to get to the C-suite. I'm like, she's in the C-suite. I'm just going to work, we're going to work together on the change. This is your change. And we did work together in that team where
Mhm.
you said you were the good cop and I was a bad cop, and I corrected it always where it's like, no, you're the good cop and I'm the ultimate good cop. I'm not a bad cop. I just, but I could say things that you can't say
Right.
because I could say those things. I'm external. So
Right.
we could decide like, well, when do you need the internal person with the internal savvy? And when do you need the external person who could say whatever, because I'm only here for a little time, a little amount of time. My job's not at risk. My bonus isn't at risk. My career path's
Right.
not at risk. I could say things that you can't say. So I think there's some value from that standpoint, even if you did the work 5 years later, that you had the skill sets, but having that partner could be
Definitely.
beneficial.
Definitely. And I think, everybody's at a different place. I mean, I feel like I have much more confidence 10 years later to say things that maybe I wouldn't have said 10 years ago. But the things that I'm working on now are higher stakes. And so, having some expertise where I don't have it, I have no issue, doing that. It's a bit like the territorial conversation. It's like, it's not about that. It's about what's the best outcome for the organization.
So what kind of consultants or coaches do HR executives look for? Like what are the big hot things right now that a consultant should focus on in order to turn the head of an HR executive like yourself?
So for me personally, I think having sort of an understanding of all of the pressures that exist in a corporate environment at the moment. Um, it is not easy in any business environment at the moment for all the reasons that everybody knows, right? Inflation, the labor market, political, geopolitical instability, the great resignation, the great reevaluation, pandemic, ongoing fears in certain geographies around, health and safety because of the pandemic. So I think understanding the pain points that organizations and executives are dealing with is really important. So, because I think that creates an ability to empathize, the ability to connect with people. And I always say you don't have to be, a raging extrovert to connect with people. There's all sorts of different styles that connect. And quite frankly, that's what I do look for with coaches and consultants is what's the right fit for this particular person or this particular initiative. And for me, because of the nature of our organization, I need somebody that can marry the academic part of it with a very pragmatic approach. We're an incredibly pragmatic organization. So if somebody comes in and is too sort of out in the ether with the academic side of it, it's just not going to land well.
Yeah, I don't think it lands well for any organization really. It's being more around how can I make it make sense to this particular organization. Is there specific gaps like in that HR people won't typically staff up and say, well, we really typically do hire out for this kind of expertise. Like, I don't think, do you have somebody, like is agile leadership a big thing for you? Emotional intelligence, like, or are there certain topic areas that are important, or is there a certain subject matter expertise like org design or strategy, or is there something that is really important right now that might have been different even a couple years ago?
I mean, I think it depends, and I'm hesitating because a lot's changed in our organization since a couple of years ago. I used to have internal org design capability, and then when the pandemic hit, we restructured like a lot of companies, and we had an early retirement program. So I did lose a lot of capability in that space. And so, if we were going to embark on, some big org design work, I would probably want to think about supplementing our internal capabilities with, not so much the philosophy, because I think I've got that, but just having fresh eyes, right? Anytime you've been in an organization, like I always say, once you've been in a company for 12 months, you've lost your objectivity. So
Yes.
the objectivity piece of it is really important for me. And we did a big org design sort of analysis around centralizing our digital marketing capabilities. but it was before COVID. And so in that particular instance, because there were a lot of stakeholders, we knew that we could do it ourselves, but we wanted to create this combination of internal expertise and external credibility. Because some of the stakeholders were very much people that were like, well, what would you know about IT, or what would you know about digital marketing? But now, I mean, it's a little bit of a different landscape, and we're not doing that kind of work as such. But I always am looking for, if we're going to do something that's, you know, pretty significant, it's like, how do you supplement your internal capabilities with some external capabilities and perspective? I think those fresh eyes and that objective approach is really important.
Yeah, it seems like that's the big thing, that it's not like you don't know what you need to do, but it either could be is from a credibility standpoint, it's better to have somebody else do it and to have that fresh set of eyes. And to have somebody, I would imagine for you, having someone to, you know, bounce ideas with and, you know, have that think partnership going back and forth. It seems like for you too, that it's very important that someone partners with you and not treat you as not as the client. I know my experience with you, it's like, I can't imagine working with you where I did not treat you as you were the client versus the CEO as the client.
Yes, and I think, you know, maybe that's a sensitivity that HR practitioners have, because, you know, for years we've fought to have a seat at the table. And honestly, I think that one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that it's elevated the importance of and the impact of having strong HR leadership in your organization. And so I think that whenever we feel that we are being sort of circumvented, it becomes a little frustrating. But again, you have to have earned the right for somebody to feel that they can partner with you and not go to the finance person or the marketing person or the CEO. So it's a balance. And that's, again, when, you know, you got to really focus. I really focus on making sure that I choose the right fit for what we're looking to do, and somebody that I think will be a partner. But also, I'm not super territorial where it's like, hey, if you need to go talk to the CEO or talk to the CFO or talk to the CMO, then by all means go do that. But you know, don't disintermediate me in the process, because, you know, I know more about this organization, looking at it across the board from a people and process and, you know, workflow perspective than any one of those individuals might.
Yeah, for sure. And you're going to be the one who's going to be carrying the change when the consultant leaves. So it makes absolute. I got that advice all the time when I was a new consulting business owner, and it never made sense to me. Like, I don't understand. I'm not living this change. I'm not owning this. Somebody's got to own this change if I have any hope of making a difference. So that doesn't even make sense. So I'm glad that to get that validation from what I was rejecting as bad advice. So when you think about companies now, you mentioned the several different pain points that we're all aware of, you know, the great resignation, the inflation, job market, all of that. How is it affecting companies like yours that are established, like the goals that they're trying to achieve? Like, what goals does a company that has been number one in its space for a long time, like, what are the goals on the horizon, and what are these things doing? Like, what are these pain points standing in the way of? What kind of goals are they not achieving that they really want to? And would it be beneficial to have anybody, like, just getting that think partnership around, like, how do we get this company, like, let's not whack-a-mole all these problems. Let's just get beyond the problems, and what's the goal we're trying to achieve so we can get creative?
Well, I think for us, and probably most companies that I know of when I talk to my peers, you know, getting the right people into your organization is a critical goal. There's so much churn, there's so much turnover. People are reevaluating what they want from their employer, from their career, from their work-life balance. And so I think, you know, making sure you've got a really strong employee value proposition is really critical. And, you know, some companies are naturally good at that because they've got the size and scale and expertise in-house, but I'm not sure that, I think in the small to medium enterprise space, I think a lot of those organizations are struggling to understand the importance of investing in an employee value proposition. Because I don't care how good your strategy is, our strategies withstood the test of a pandemic. We're good. If we don't have the right people in the right place at the right time doing the right things, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And so it's been really interesting to hear our leaders talk about, as they're doing team meetings and brand conferences, that they are definitely doubling down on culture as a competitive advantage, because we have to have the people to bring our brands to life.
That's an interesting thing. I haven't heard it said that way, as culture as a competitive advantage.
Mm-hmm.
In all those years of as a consultant, as an OD consultant who's all about culture and environment, we just talk about it being healthy. We never really talked about culture as a competitive advantage. That's a really interesting concept.
Yeah. And, we've fortunately, unfortunately, we've lost people over the last couple of years, like everybody else has. Fortunately, they're coming back, because what they're being lured away for is not enough for the dysfunctional cultures that some of the people are telling us they had to endure. And I think humans in general have reevaluated what they will and won't put up with. And so, we've made a conscious decision that we're going to invest in, our culture as a competitive advantage, whether that's making sure we've got the best leaders in place, making sure we've got a competitive total rewards offering, making sure that we are developing and growing our people, making sure that we have a culture that doesn't tolerate, discrimination, harassment, and making sure we've got a culture where people can come to work and bring their whole, true, authentic selves to work every single day without, feeling unsafe. I mean, there's a lot of different arms to this, but that is literally what I spend my time thinking about, is how do we win based on having a culture as a competitive advantage?
And if your company, if any company had culture as a competitive advantage, if you're picturing that, you had that, you got all the right people in the right places, what goal would the company be able to achieve that others couldn't? Is it market dominance? Is it brand, how does that translate in terms of the ROI, if you will? If you were going to put the business case in front of your clients and say, we need to make culture as a competitive advantage, and we're going to have the right people at the right time, and you could put the business case around the attrition and the turnover and all of that. But if you were going to connect it to the bigger goals, what goal would you connect it to if you were putting that business case together?
So I would say that we already do connect it, and we connect it to winning market share, right? We're in an industry that is relatively mature. So it's not what I would call a high growth industry, but it is it's a winners and losers industry. And so for us, it's like, how do we come back stronger after the last 2 years and capture more market share? That's really what we're super focused on.
So that's really important, because a lot of HR people don't talk about market share. And that's a really important thing. Oh my gosh, yes. Trying to get people to talk about the business outcomes. They don't know.
Well, and it's funny, because not every company's going to be thinking about market share, right? Some companies might be wanting to drive margin. And we obviously look at that, but there's only so much margin we can drive in our particular industry. So you've got to look at your industry and understand what your metrics are that signal to your board or your owners or your shareholders or whatever the case may be, like, what are you being measured on? And as an HR practitioner, you better damn well know what your company's success is being measured on. Like, to me, that's just mind-blowing that people would not understand that.
And I would say the same thing is, if you're a consultant who's working for an organization, you need to know what the success criteria of the company is that you're going into. Otherwise, you're going to whack-a-mole problems. But the thing that I think is interesting is there's a certain trend compared to when I first started in consulting, is that we're just and when I first started in consulting, or maybe it's because I was at Disney, everything was vision driven, yes, we want to have business results, but it's all about the customer experience, and it's all around the vision. Like, this is what we want this property to be, or this is what we want it to be. And it seems like over the years, company vision around not just going straight to what's the pure business results seems to have lessened or be less important because of the pressure for the 90-day numbers and the pressure for the shorter term profitability. From your standpoint, how do you keep, as a visionary leader, how do you keep the vision, the purpose, the bigger reason for why the company exists alive in the hearts and minds of the people around you? So it's like, how do you balance this business side with the why? Why does this company exist?
Well, and so once again, I feel like I'm very fortunate because my company is, obviously we have certain financial results we have to achieve. We're a publicly held company. But we've just been having this conversation in the current context of just the volatility of the operating environment. And we've made a conscious decision to be very mindful of what we're here to do versus, committing to a financial plan that's going to cause us to make short-term decisions that are going to negatively impact the long-term sustainability of the business. And so again, I've been in both environments where everything's about like, what do we got to do this quarter to make the numbers? And I will never work in that environment again. That's personal choice. So it's not that difficult for us because, our organization, our culture, our leadership, our CEO, we're all about like our purpose and what we're here to do every single day. Like everything we do, how we communicate, the decisions we make is all about thinking about what, at the end of the day, what are we here to do other than make money? That's table stakes, right? If you're not making money, you can't do anything good for the most part in the environment that I work in. So it's become an interesting thing over the last 2 years. We had to make a lot of really difficult decisions. And a lot of people have asked us, how did you do it? Because for the most part, we've made pretty good decisions. And I said, we always kept our values and our vision at the core of our decision-making conversations. And as we explored different options, we're like, okay, well, how does this tap back into our purpose and our values? And so that's a leadership. Yeah, and I feel very blessed that I get to be part of a team like that, but I also chose to be part of a team like that.
I think that now I think I have the big picture around like, what is the secret of your success? It seems like as your career and you were moving up, it was always being that curious, hungry learner with your ambition. And then this perspective around you as an entrepreneur and you taking charge of like your career, what you want, the vision and what influencing however you imagine it to be, and really building off of that ability, that skill set. And then where it seems like your career went into a flywheel is when you put yourself in an environment where what you brought to the table and the environment and the culture and the company and the leadership and the company, everything about it fit you. And there's just been a flywheel that's been at a different place where you might not have gotten there in an environment. So it's like, it's still that entrepreneur, that entrepreneurial spirit of saying, I'm going to take my career to where it needs to go. I own my leadership brand. I don't know if you talk about your own leadership brand, but it seems like you have a very clear leadership brand. And when your leadership brand was not being supported, you went and found where your leadership brand matched the company brand. And now this is just a seamless kind of experience for you. Am I hearing it right? Or am I?
I mean, I don't think I could have articulated that any better. That was perfect. And what I will tell you is I spend a lot of time now, getting asked for advice and mentoring others. And I always say to them, chase leaders and culture, and the money and the titles will come. Because I wouldn't be where I am if I wasn't in an environment with a culture and the support of leadership that understands and supports my style, right? If I was in a more buttoned up formal environment, I probably wouldn't be where I am. Frankly, I probably wouldn't have stayed there anyway. So maybe it would have been like, sliding doors movie and I would have ended up here anyway. But I just honestly, if I could tell my younger self one thing, it would be like, chase leaders and culture. And I've done that. It was completely accidental, but somewhere in my psyche, I must have known that those were the things that were important to me because I had opportunities to do other things. I'm like, it's not right. It's out of alignment with who I am and what I want and what I value. Every time, the only time in my career that I had an icy patch was when I had a leader whose values were just so completely misaligned with mine. And I nearly, made a change, and as luck would have it, things turned out differently and I ended up staying with the organization. But that was a really valuable lesson for me. And I try so hard with all these young people. It's like, I know you want the big title and the big money, but it's a short-term decision. If you follow your heart and chase great leaders that will get the best out of you, you talked about the flywheel. You might get this opportunity now that's more money now and a bigger title now, but you've got to think about the long term, and you've got to think about that flywheel, because with great cultures and great leaders, your runway is going to be way longer than the short-term decision.
That's awesome. And we are so aligned, because how did you know that one of my 2 wrap-up questions for my interviews is, if you had one piece of advice for your younger self, what would it be? So that's one of my wrap-up questions. So thank you so much for sharing that one. But my last one is there anything else that you want to share with me about your leadership journey, or your time as an executive, or being in HR, consulting, coaching, anything? And I just didn't ask you the right question.
No, I think you've touched on everything. I really genuinely believe that people buy people, not products. And so trying to put myself in the shoes of, the people that are listening today or watching today, it's like, you've building that connection with whoever it is that you want to work with. Don't underestimate the value of that. The work is really important, and the work that you will do is, obviously you have an expertise in a certain thing or topic or subject or whatever it may be, or initiative or strategy. But there's more Betsy Jordyns out there than just Betsy Jordyn. But I think when we met, it was such an instant chemistry. And so the expertise combined with that chemistry, that's what sealed the deal. And I think that people underestimate the importance of chemistry and connection and likability, and think about that as much as you think about, like, here's all the great things I can do for you. I think that partnership and that human and emotional connection is absolutely critical.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. This is wonderful. I'm so glad to have you on the show. And it feels like so interesting to understand your journey from this angle. And I always respected you before, but now it's just, I'm in awe of what you are able to accomplish, and just your whole mindset. This was brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And it was my pleasure. It's always great to see you.